I know you're too nice. Yeah, you guys can come all the way down the front, plenty of space. That's it, yeah, perfect. You guys want to come all the way down? You just want to leave a slight wee gap at the back as well, just in case anyone needs to come through. That's perfect. Yeah, if you guys want to just come in a wee bit forward, that would be absolutely perfect. Thank you very much. Now, as I said, this is one of my favourite closes in the old town of Edinburgh. We're here in Advocates Close on the north side of the Royal Mile. It's going down the steep-sided valley down towards the new town. You can just see the fantastic Scott Monument there just on the edge of Princes Street. Now, the new town is so very different to the old town of Edinburgh. It's very neat and structured and ordered, very elegant Georgian architecture. Here in the old town, it's more kind of Gothic, these kind of winding alleyways, these closes they were called. And these closes, well, there are a couple of trains of thought as to why they're actually called closes, not just streets. The first is naturally because the buildings are so close to each other, but the second is that many of these closes literally would have been enclosed at either end with a heavy locked gate for extra security, extra protection. These were dangerous places to be in the past. This is where you as the Edinburgh mob would have lived. Now, Advocates is quite typical, narrow, steep, buildings rising quite high on either side. But I want you to imagine the buildings of the past. They rose 3 times the height they stand today. Some of these buildings stood up to 15 stories tall. And in these towering tenements, both the poor and rich would live together, cramped in the most awful living conditions. The Edinburgh you see today was not the city of the past. The city was hugely overpopulated. Disease was rife. You can imagine these closes literally running with filth, sometimes knee deep. I'm sure you can imagine the reason why. Back then they didn't have luxuries like plumbing or drainage, and they had to use the miraculous invention of the bucket in the corner of the room as a toilet. Imagine at the end of the day this one bucket used by the entire family. It would be full to the brim with what we will very politely describe as being sausage casserole, which I certainly sincerely hope that none of you have had for lunch today, in which case I really do apologise. But once the hours of night have fallen on the city by law, buckets could be emptied. You're not going to risk carrying a bucket down 15 flights of stairs with contents flopping all over the place. You do the easiest thing and take it to your nearest window. You would open the window wide. You would give a great shout of warning. You would say, "Gardy Lou," a corruption of the French, meaning mind the water. If you didn't receive a shout from beneath, you would simply tip the disgusting contents of that bucket off the side of that 15-story tall building. You can imagine its contents gathering speed as they fell, plummeting down into the close beneath. The reason they shouted "Gardy Lou," imagine these closes when the tenements were so high, no electricity and middle of the night. Barely be able to see where you were going. If you hear "Gardy Lou" being shouted, you would shout back, hold your hand and run as fast as you could in the complete opposite direction. But maybe there were a couple of accidents over the year and maybe "Gardy Lou" was not heard in time. And that poor unfortunate person such as yourselves would just be merrily making your way home one night and might hear a slight whisper above you. Maybe the sound of something slipping down there. Maybe something very, very heavy just land there right on your shoulder. You might do the natural thing, you might look up. Maybe your mouth would fall open just a little bit to hear "Gardy Lou." On the plus side, you did not have to pay for dinner that evening. But I'm just going to say to all of you, if you're going to decide to explore more of Edinburgh's beautiful closes, there's so many of them. If you were going to look up and admire the heights they stand at today, look up with your mouths firmly closed, because the Nastiness Act, as it was known, that allowed people to throw their waste out of open windows, this has never actually been repealed here in the city, which means still legal to do so. But I think we'll chance our luck just a little bit longer. I would like to tell you about something that used to happen before the new town was built. Before the new town stood there, I want you to imagine the Nor Loch or North Lake. This is a kind of swampy marshland of water. It used to stretch all the way from Waverley Station right the way along to underneath the castle. And of course on the north side of the city, this is where all the sausage casserole would have made its way down into. So the Nor Loch was eventually drained and turned into Princes Street Gardens, which is probably why those gardens are very lush. Green, fertile, think about that next time you're having a romantic evening walk. Something quite horrible used to happen on the banks of the Nor Loch. Edinburgh has a very unfortunate history of people being accused of being witches. It was normally for very, very silly things. Maybe someone was a bit outspoken in society. Maybe they did things a little bit differently. Maybe they would be muttering to themselves. Maybe they had a cat or familiar. Maybe they were just simply left-handed. Anyone left-handed here today? Okay. Does anyone have kind of lovely reddish auburn hair? Okay, I think we're good. Does anyone have a cat? You're good. 1 out of 3, you're good. But back then, this might have been a sign of you being a witch or even a warlock. Now, the first thing that would happen, you'd be arrested. You'd be taken to the toll booth jail. Used to stand just next to St. Giles Cathedral. When we walked around it, you might have seen a small heart-shaped emblem in stone on the ground. You might also see some people spitting down onto the stone. Don't walk directly over it. This is just a tradition carried forward from people who used to spit on the door of the toll booth jail itself. It was eventually demolished in the early 1800s, but when it stood there, it was a place of terror. You'd be taken inside and tortured. The most horrible things imaginable, but the worst punishment of all, if you still did not confess by that point, you'd be taken down to the Nor Lock. You would be dunked, hands tied to your ankles. You'd be thrown into the middle of the murky water. The general thinking back then was, if you sunk to the bottom of the Nor Lock, you were innocent of witchcraft. I mean, you were dead, but more importantly, you were innocent of witchcraft. If you floated to the surface of the Nor Lock, it was said that you were guilty of being a witch. You were hauled out, asked on the banks one last time, given a chance to confess, renounce the devil. If you did not, taken to Castle Hill, you'd be burnt alive. Over 300 people were burnt alive on Castle Hill itself. There's a small fountain there memorial to this day. Maybe over 4,000 people across Scotland burnt alive on account of being named for being a witch. Of course, you do still have to be quite economical though, all this going on. So the family or loved ones of the person being burnt alive for being a witch, they had to provide the money to pay for the fuel for the fire and to pay for the wood. Quite a gruesome time, I'm sure you agree. But of course, this great witch hunt did eventually end with things like common sense and scientific knowledge. Things that people previously blamed on what witches could do were very easily explained away, so it did eventually quieten down, but at one point it was such a fever, people were terrified of it. Now that was quite a gruesome tale, I think you agree. You're okay with that gruesome tale then, weren't you? You're like, yeah, more gruesome, I like it. So I would like to take you a wee bit further down the Royal Mile itself, down into another one of my favourite closes, to tell you perhaps even more gruesome a tale. Now as I said, please do stay very, very close together. We're just going to be heading down a wee bit further down into Borthwick's Close. So please follow me.